and I've learned my lesson. Going to be investing in the Microsoft suite shortly. Anyhow, okay, thanks for solving that at the back there. So a bit about me. I have a degree in environmental and soil science from our own University of Saskatchewan here. I also completed an interdisciplinary Masters of the Environment at the University of Manitoba, and that saw me working with Indigenous communities and exploring their priorities around accessing healthy food in remote Northern Reserve communities. So I come from a bit of an unusual roundabout background to farming. The majority of my pre-farming career was actually spent as an extension agrologist in Saskatchewan and Alberta, and I actually helped farmers and ranchers access programs that were related to agro-environmental programming, that were an outcome of the policy and the NPF that's being discussed here today. It was back in the day, but it was the same sort of concepts. I used to work with those programs. My specialty was in beef forage and range management, and it was through these experiences that I gained a passion for soil health. So I returned to the farm full-time in 2017, committed to implementing soil health practices on our farm and ranch, and a lot has changed since then. I now farm alongside my husband Dan and my mom and dad and a small team of dedicated staff. And in 2021, we added our newest farm family member, Ken, who is already obsessed with tractors and all things farming. Although for now, we're keeping his tractors small and non-operational. So I joined Sasksoil in 2022. I served as president in 2024 and 25. I briefly want to acknowledge there's two other Sasksoil people here today. Mark Heimer's here. He is our recently retired board member and was also a past president. And Chuck Ewert's here today. Chuck's a current board member with me and just finished a webinar last night discussing some of his experiences with a variety of soil health practices. So Sasksoil is a producer-driven nonprofit organization. We're run by a volunteer board of directors. It's drawn from agricultural producers across the province, and we have permanent positions for the Ministry of Agriculture and the University of Saskatchewan or any other provincial educational institution. And we also have open board positions for industry and non-governmental organizations. But the balance of the board is producers. It's, and it's that way in our bylaws. It is a producer-directed organization. So there's a variety of benefits to membership. It's cheap, $50 a year, discount on all of our activities, which includes field days, workshops, and webinars. There's a newsletter that goes out monthly that has little tidbits of information. We summarize information that's coming out of our webinars and other events and present them that way to people. It's an excellent networking thing, and being a member also enables you to join our board. And we also have charitable status. I'd like to say, if you have a rich uncle or of someone else's rich uncle, maybe you are a rich uncle, we have charitable status. You can think about us. So I want to dive into the history of the organization just a bit. So we were formerly known as the Saskatchewan Soil Conservation Association, and most of us are really familiar with that organization as prairie farmers. So that was founded in 1987 by Saskatchewan farmers concerned about soil conservation. And it's most famous for being a major driving force in the extension that occurred to bring first chemical fallow and secondly continuous cropping and no-till farming to prairie agriculture. So our organization has a strong history of being involved in soil health, carbon sequestration, the emerging field of regenerative agriculture, and climate resilience in farming systems. So SSCA was close to closing its doors back in 2020. It seemed that the job was done. The majority of Saskatchewan producers are now operating, under the auspices of no-till and continuous cropping. However, there was a new generation of producers coming into the board who were starting to wonder, is no-till enough? Is there other things that we can be doing in prairie agriculture? So we shifted focus largely in response to these interests being brought to the organization by the younger membership. We do find that a lot of the interest in our organization comes from producers who are trying to understand how to apply concepts from ecology, permaculture, and regenerative agriculture to their operations, which are largely commercial grain and cattle farms, just the same as much of the Saskatchewan landscape is managed by. So loosely speaking, we can frame these practices as falling under the soil health principles. Those are keep the soil covered, maintain a living root, promote plant diversity, manage disturbance, and integrate livestock where possible. And this is just a framing that's used within soil health circles because it's easy. It helps people to kind of have some very simple guidelines for taking a look at their operation and being like, am I doing this? Are there ways that I could improve? So with these practices in mind, Sasksoil began seeking new partners and means of operating. A majority of our partners do have some type of interest in climate resilience, soil protection, and wetland and watercourse conservation. Those seem to be the natural partners that were coming together. So one of our largest partners is Farmers for Climate Solutions. We developed our Farm Resilience Mentorship Program through them. They maintain an independent online learning hub that contains all sorts of learning opportunities that can be freely accessed with membership. And FCS specifically offers Sasksoil support for all of our learning activities. Any webinars, field days, workshops, and our AGM, we're able to access some of those funds to help those activities take place. And the education, it's part of the funding outcomes that came from the last round of negotiations with the policy framework. So the education is framed around cover cropping, advanced nitrogen management, and advanced grazing systems. These are just a few photos of our 2024 field day. It was a drought year. I really do not want you to look very closely at my durum crop. But do have a look at the soil. So the soils that are pictured there are 1.5 miles apart. They're very close. And I have to admit there are some underlying structural and development differences between the two soils that can account for the differences that you see visually. But you can really see the platy structure on the left versus the crumb structure on the right. And within that photo that's on the right, you see that little white speck. That's not plant matter or dirt or whatever. That's actually a fungal body that's present in that soil. And so these two soils, the one on the left is from that drought-blighted durum crop, and the one on the right is from a field where I had been concentrating all of my attempts at following soil health principles. And I really did feel that, that it started to make a difference. The one on the right, 10 years of soil health practices, and the one on the left is business as usual on a typical 4-year continuous cropping no-till rotation in southwestern Saskatchewan. Another important funder for us is the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds through the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada On-Farm Climate Action Fund. And so we hosted soil health superstar Joel Williams on a whirlwind tour across Saskatchewan back in November. Again, the focus was on cover cropping and nitrogen management. And there was 20 to 30 producers at each location, all excited about soil health. And, the events really created opportunities to learn not only from Joel, but also from each other, as we had producer speakers at each event as well. Our main event, that's just a few pictures of those events. And our main event each year is our conference. And so that's combined with our annual general meeting. It takes place in February every year. We alternate between Regina and Saskatoon as a location. And it's an excellent blend of local producers implementing soil health practices, plus some well-known keynote speakers, and we do make use of our local researchers from universities and AAFC and other research institutions. So this year's theme was Soil Health is a Puzzle, What's Your Missing Piece? Our superstar speakers this year were Dr. David Johnson and his partner Wei Chung Su, who developed the Johnson-Su method for developing fungal dominant compost in a static no-turn pile. So it's the easiest way to manage compost to create a product it's safe to take an extract from and apply it onto your field. And it's sort of like it's the easiest way. A lot of people who try to get involved in composting, there's ways of doing it that are effective and ways of doing it that aren't. So that was what they were talking about. And our board member, Chuck Ewert, who's here today, he also spoke. And Chuck uses this method, and he was able to speak to his experiences at the conference on making use of it on his commercial grain farm in Saskatchewan. We also had the pleasure of hosting Senator Robert Black as our keynote the morning of the second day of the conference. And he actually sought our organization out, offering to come out from Ontario to speak to us. So Senator Black was instrumental in developing the 2023 report on the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. So it's entitled Critical Ground, Why Soil is Essential to Canada's Economic, Environmental, Human, and Social Health. The report's available online, anybody can access it. And it acknowledges the gains made in Saskatchewan, through the efforts of our own organization in the past and other important groups with the adoption of continuous cropping and no-till agriculture. And it also highlights the importance of continuing to make strides in this area. So Dr. Johnson and his research partner, they were also pleased to see the attention of the federal government to our organization and offered to share some of the private research results they are observing through the use of soil inoculants derived from the Johnson-Su compost method. So we're hopeful that that connection, continues to take place and that information gets delivered into Senator Black's hands. So returning to our organization, producers really come to us for four things. The first of these is mentoring networks. Another is an understanding of how to apply practices and techniques. A third is exposure to new technologies, and then a fourth is an exposure to new equipment options. And a really important part of what makes those next three adoptions possible is the mentorship networks. So this is just a photo of something we've been doing at our conferences these past 2 years. They're producer learning activities structured as breakout sessions. So they're guided by a producer expert who's probably already spoken on their area of specialty within soil health. But then the whole group is gathering together in sort of an open format for an opportunity to share knowledge and experiences. It's been really well received, and it's really this type of learning that takes place at any of our events. And peer-to-peer learning is just so essential for any type of change. Producers trust one another. They're especially excited to talk to someone who has tried something new in a similar context to what they're dealing with. Be a business type, you want to talk to somebody else who's a dairy or a cattle producer or a grain producer, and also climate conditions. It would be very hard for somebody from southwestern Saskatchewan to have a conversation about cover cropping with somebody from Yorkton. We hate those guys. No one is selling anything. The information is trusted. And producers have been in the ring. They know what the limitations are around finances, climate, and available labor. Farmers are also the only ones with the full details of how to bring something conceptual into a real-life in-field scenario. Finally, peer-to-peer learning is known to accelerate adoption, as it gives producers the opportunity to avoid making someone else's mistakes. It creates permanent connections around mutual learning that continue long past an event, and it's then able to advance collective knowledge pools more rapidly. So I can't say enough about how important I think peer-to-peer learning is for anything, really. So I'd like to briefly dive into some of these practices, technologies, and equipment options that producers are adopting. I've structured this discussion under the soil health principles. That's just how they make sense in my own mind, but I did want to take an opportunity to explain that this framing is mine. Sasksoil welcomes anyone interested in soil to become a member and to contribute to the conversation around soil health. We're not tied to specific practices or suites of practices. Rather, our strength is in creating space for peer-driven, measurable, for high-quality conversations around soil function and performance with a focus on achieving real, measurable in-the-field results. We do find, however, that many of the young producers drawn to our organization are experimenting with novel practices, technologies, and equipment, largely as a result of exposure to the soil health principles. So starting with keeping the soil covered, why would we want to keep soil covered? And I can comment on this personally as I had the chance to measure my own soil temperature and water infiltration rates at our field day in 2024. And I was confident that we were relatively successful grain farmers and had nothing to fear with this. My family adopted, continuous cropping. We did chemical fallow for a couple of years in the early 90s and then immediately switched into continuous cropping and, what they call single pass tillage or no-till. Depending on your school of thought. But I thought we were pretty good. Our local agrologist, Troy LaForge, he was coming out to speak that day, and him and I know each other pretty good, and Troy had asked me to go out in advance, take some rye straw that we'd taken off of a field, a couple of years back, and spread it in kind of a 1 meter by 1 meter section. And this was about 2 weeks before the event. And so the rest of the field was actually in a trial in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture that had a few different types of swath grazing established. So that's what we were looking at. And we went and looked at the temperature differences between the covered land and the uncovered land. and it was astounding. It happened to be the hottest day of the year in mid-July when we had this field day. The uncovered land was 45 degrees Celsius. The covered land was 25 degrees Celsius. And I mean, that cover hadn't been in place for very long, just 2 weeks, right? And then we did the infiltration test. We do with Sasksoil sell infiltration kits. They're an excellent, easily accessible thing that farmers and ranchers can use to measure infiltration. And so what they do is they sort of simulate 1 inch of rainfall and you time how long it takes for that infiltration to take place. So on the uncovered land, it took 12 minutes to infiltrate, and on the covered land, it only took 5. And again, that cover had only been in place for 2 weeks. So that's kind of, it's interesting, but that's the consequence of leaving bare ground exposed, especially in hot and dry conditions. So the hot soil temperatures that kill soil life, they radiate heat back to the plants that are likely already struggling with drought conditions, and the soil forms a crust, which impedes rainwater infiltration. So it's really a vicious cycle. Things that can help us to address this issue are switching to a high carbon residue rotation. And I know that talking about what Americans do right is a touchy subject right now, but I have to compliment their Natural Resource Conservation Service. That's a publicly funded research body active in all agricultural areas with fully funded demonstration farms in the United States. And their research long ago showed that a high carbon rotation resulted in improved overall yields when compared to a standard rotation, within about 4 or 5 years. And that data is available. Of course, once you have a heavy mulch on the ground, you might have to consider investing in a disc drill, as a standard 1-inch soil opener can't always get through that residue. And the accompanying piece of equipment might be a stripper header, which leaves a very tall stubble on the land that is excellent for snow catch. The next soil principle, how do we maintain a living root and why? The why can be loosely summarized as a commitment to continuing to provide carbon to the soil microbial community for as long as possible via root exudates. And we can accomplish this in several ways, a popular one being the use of cover crops. Other options include perennial rotations, and importantly, winter cereal rotations, like the inclusion of fall rye, winter wheat, winter triticale, and even heritage grains like red fife can act as facultative winter cereals. So this is one of the areas where Sasksoil helped me out extensively. When I first started trying to put in soil health practices, I was trying to put in a cover following harvest. That does not work in southwestern Saskatchewan. But once I spoke to some other producers, I learned how they were doing it, and they were doing it much more effectively, than I was, and I was able to start copying them, and I learned a lot. So that field on that picture on the left is actually red clover. It was overseeded using a Valmar and harrowed in on a pea canola intercrop. It's a biennial, so it overwintered. That fall, right after the pea canola was harvested, we went in and we seeded fall rye right on top. We skipped a spray operation. Then following spring, fall rye came up. We had fertilized it in the fall. Because of the drought conditions, we chose not to fertilize any further. The fall rye came off, and then that red clover had just been sitting there vegetative the entire time. And it continued to provide that living root after the fall rye came off. And those of you who farm know once fall rye comes off, you might be two months before, freeze up with just naked ground. And what I did was I opened the gates and I turned my little cows out onto that red clover, and they thought those pink flowers were delicious, and they took all of those pink flower heads off. And my red clover completed its life cycle. It's not coming back. And I accomplished a pretty important soil health goal. There's a few other things I've tried. That second photo from the left is actually sandfoin. That's a short-lived perennial that I've established. I established it the year that I grew some hard red spring wheat. And that same year, I also had Italian ryegrass. And that bigger photo over on the right is the Italian ryegrass. It also overwinters. And this is in southwestern Saskatchewan, folks. Like, if I can do this, anybody can do this. But I dug up one of those Italian ryegrasses just to take a look, and you can really see the rhizosphere activity around that root zone. So that's very early in the season before we've even got in there with the drill. And it's just showing that soil development, all of that sticky, gooey activity that's coming right around the rhizosphere, the rhizosheath, that area immediately surrounding the living root. And a few other things we've tried is, winter triticale underseeded to durum. That's that third picture from the left. It came back, and I just sprayed it out and went on my merry way with my next crop in rotation. So those are some ways to accomplish cover cropping. Perennials in rotation and the use of winter cereals also very important. So the next principle, how do we promote plant diversity? One of the most important options in Saskatchewan is the practice of intercropping. So that's my chickpea flax intercrop from 2025 over on the right. Other ways of doing that include cover cropping with biennials, grazing annuals, grazing multi-species perennials, having a perennial in rotation. But the one that I really love is intercropping, because Saskatchewan is just such a hotbed of intercropping innovation. Some of the best intercroppers, I would say the best intercroppers in the world, are located right here in our province. And I believe that intercropping will actually save SCIC money, and I'll just give you an example. We've been in drought for about 4 or 5 years. That changed in 2025, but it didn't change until the month of July. So I seeded this flax chickpea intercrop with, the highest of hopes. It didn't rain the entire month of May. It didn't rain the entire month of June. In July, it rained 12 inches. Now, can you guess what happened to the chickpea component of this intercrop? It was a wreck. It was a mess. If I had had a chickpea monocrop, I would have been making a crop insurance claim. But instead, and chickpeas were supposed to be the main crop here. The flax was just kind of supposed to be in there as a support crop. I only put it in at 15 pounds per acre. And I still ended up harvesting a 22 bushel per acre flax crop and not making an SCIC claim when I otherwise would have been in a position to do so. An important question of equipment adoption when it comes to intercropping is that of seed separation. So this is our setup for seed separation. It's a small rotary Farm King cleaner. It's very simple, it's very inexpensive, it's not particularly good, and it's not fast. And so, it works, and I really, really love intercropping, but I do have to admit that I'm limited in my ability to adopt intercropping more broadly as a significant part of our rotation because of the seed separation. So successful intercroppers really need the ability to invest in high-quality on-farm seed separation and cleaning systems to make this a significant part of their operation. Now, I do want to provide a brief nod to native prairie systems in Saskatchewan. Sasksoil does work extensively with cattle producers, and we do manage a small cow-calf herd and a small amount of fragmented native prairie. And I just want to acknowledge that, following the soil health principles sounds really great, and that maybe all of our problems are solved if we can just follow the soil health principles. But it's really important to acknowledge the work that's being done with native prairie ecosystems and to continue to support that work. There's absolutely nothing that replaces an intact ecosystem and the perennial tame stands that come with supporting cattle grazing in Saskatchewan. So that's why that's in there. I just don't want you guys to forget about it. And that kind of brings us to the point. In the end, annual crop production in Saskatchewan is a disturbance on the landscape in comparison to the natural ecosystem. So how do we manage for disturbance? Some of the innovative practices might include riparian buffers and pollinator strips. I mean, that photo is from some of our native prairie. That's a western red lily, our provincial flower. Wouldn't it be amazing to see a mixture like that growing along all of our watercourses in Saskatchewan, or intact as pollinator strips within an agricultural field? And it is being done. There's people starting to do it. Equipment adoption might include things like the disc drills, crimpers, weed seed rollers, which destroy the weed seeds on their way out of the combine. And then this question is where we get into some of the novel technologies that our Sasksoil members are interested in trying out and understanding and seeing how it can fit into their operation. So they include novel fertility tactics like sap and tissue analysis and mid-season foliar feeding to complement traditional soil tests. They include setting up RTK and RTX precision GPS systems on the farm for precision farming. Many of our producers are investing in things like variable rate and sectional control and integrated digital field mapping. And that precision with GPS also allows for precise seed placement for cover and companion crops and intercrops. That makes a difference to the success of those types of practices. Within sprayers, the sprayer tech that we're looking into is green seeker tech, pH adjusters, and high-end water filtration systems. So many of our producers are actually choosing to invest in like extensive water filtration and cleaning and osmosis before they actually put it through the sprayer. And this isn't something we've gotten into personally, but they're reporting that it makes a difference in terms of the efficacy of spray. And then finally, another tech is soil inoculants and biostimulants and the commercial biohacks that are coming onto the market in droves right now. So this is just a quick snapshot of something that we tried on farm this year. It was hard to say what the result was, but my husband was very relieved that it didn't plug up the sprayer. So the first bucket is dissolved fulvic acid. The second is dissolved protein hydrolysate as a foliar nitrogen source, that it's actually an organic nitrogen source. The third is a pH adjuster. And then the fourth is a photo of me taking a Brix reading, which I did before and after the spray operation. Many people also add micronutrients at this time, and the whole thing is blended with the in-crop spray application. So it avoids producers having to go and make an extra run over the field, which they absolutely hate to do. I don't have to tell most of you that they're already maxed out for time, right? And then this is just a quick snapshot of the commercial products available that are sitting on my desk right now. And it's not a wonder that I have to drink this much coffee to get through this stuff, right? Early adopters are sometimes on the bleeding edge of things, and all of these things take time and money, and the producer undertakes all risk. These were certainly not on the market 20 years ago, and they range from everything that's a simple compost product all the way up to a privatized gene regulator technology that's going to have a very specific impact on plant physiology. So the final soil health principle is to integrate livestock. The easy reason is that it makes some of these other practices more affordable. You can graze covers in the fall. It gives you an excuse to integrate multi-species annuals or complex perennial blends for grazing or winter feeding. Swath and bale grazing on cropland reduces the cost of running a tractor. And those perennial systems are just so incredibly important for getting a root below the plow layer and breaking up some of that platy structure. Most of the agricultural soils in Saskatchewan have a plow layer. They have an area where the root stops penetrating after about 2 to 3 inches of depth and starts going sideways. And so we've really, we've failed to an extent to look at some of the other things that are happening with our soils in these past 20 years. Equipment that can help us get livestock integrated onto cropland include chaff bunchers, electric fencing, and then there's the emerging technology of virtual fencing starting to take off in Saskatchewan. Briefly, I want to show you my brag slides of my swath grazing from this year. Again, it didn't rain until July, and then it rained 12 inches. So at the end of June, I was actually crying and in a panic state because my polycrop had not come over the height of the previous year's stubble. And, by swathing time, it was up to my hip. And then there was this one area of the field where it was up to my chest. And that's that little heightened area right in the middle there. And we've realized that that was where at least 10 years prior, maybe more, a round bale had been fed. And that's just the incredible power, 10 years later of a little bit, just a tiny little bit of increased organic matter being incorporated into an annual cropping system. So the cattle grazed. We didn't know how this was going to turn out. We prepped with bales. I have a bunch of unused bales in my bale stack right now. These cattle stayed out there swath grazing, managed with electric fencing, right up through the entire winter season because it's been an open winter in southwestern Saskatchewan. And they're just finishing cleaning it up right now. We're about to start calving, and we've barely started to tractor this year. We love it. Another thing that we help producers with is identifying the easy tests that they can do themselves on farm. This is a picture of an aggregate stability or SLAKE test that I did, which is basically you drop a little bit of soil into water and it dissolves, and you measure how quickly or how much it dissolves. And then there's a variety of other lab tests that are helpful also. So to conclude, Sasksoil has a strong overlap in priorities with the next policy framework, namely climate adaptation and emission reduction, BMPs and environmental sustainability, ag tech and digitization, innovation in those practices, technologies, and equipment, sector competitiveness, and resilience and public trust in agriculture. We'd like you to consider us as an implementation partner as things come down the line here, and consider figuring out how to support peer-to-peer learning. It's the best and fastest way, and I feel like our organization is excellent at that. And then I have a whole list, but it basically goes back to some of those practices that I've been talking about, and figuring out ways to maybe partially cover the cost of them, subsidize purchases, build markets for winter cereals, and offer bonuses for certain practices. I'm not a policy expert, so I don't know what the best way to go about helping, what the structure is. I have no idea. I just know that these things are good, right? A few comments. We'd like to encourage SCIC to continue to support intercroppers with full coverage. Ensure SCIC doesn't deny coverage to producers who are experimental. It takes time to adopt these practices, and fear around being denied coverage is a barrier for soil health innovation and adopting new practices. Agri-stability currently requires completion of a production cycle in order to be eligible. Many of our producers are young and first-time farmers. They're the ones that are most excited about our organization right now, so we'd like to see agri-stability able to support first-time farmers. And then with the BRM programs, we'd like the gap in individualized risk management for the livestock sector to be addressed. Given that livestock incorporation is an important soil health principle, we'd like to see livestock production supported more thoroughly. And then finally, we'd really like to look at the policy recommendations from the Senate report on soil health. And I'd like to invite the groups gathered here today to come together to identify how we think those 25 recommendations presented at the end of that Senate report could best be incorporated into the framework agreement policy in a way that serves soil health in Saskatchewan. Some of my favorite recommendations are number 16, that the Government of Canada enhance funding for peer-to-peer soil networks, and 17, that the Government of Canada collaborate with the provinces and territories to enhance long-term funding for soil extension services. And there's a bunch of other excellent ones there. So thank you so much for giving me time today to talk about something that I'm so passionate about. And thank you, APAS, for having us and for listening to me. Thank you.